Welcome to According to Sam, folks, episode 304. Hope you guys had a great weekend. Hope you had a great Easter. I'm going to pick up where I left off in the last podcast. I have a lot to share with you guys. And it's going to be, again, picking up where we left off in the last podcast. And in the podcast before that, we were talking about the Humanist Manifesto. And this is Humanist Manifesto 1. This comes from the American Humanist Association. Good without God is what they say. Advocating progressive values and equality for humanists, atheists, and free thinkers. And this is the first Humanist Manifesto. There have been two others. It's been revised twice since this first one. But this first one was composed in 1933. This is after World War I, after the Bolshevik Revolution, before World War II, before the Nazis. And if you read the revision Humanist Manifesto 2, they actually make reference to Hitler and the Nazis and how we have to rethink things after what just happened in Europe. I don't know why the Bolshevik Revolution didn't give them insights to make them rethink things. But this first Humanist Manifesto was composed in 1933, and I explained how it was signed by John Dewey, who was the father of public education. That these principles that are in this were the principles that Dewey set out to create through public education, is to create a materialistic, low vibration, vacuous society that is not connected to any God or any spirituality. They're just, base human beings that come from nature. There is no God. There is no higher purpose. We're just, we're just here accidentally, and our only purpose is to consume material possessions, to consume products, to enjoy pleasure, and then die. That's ultimately what they wanted to create, and that's what this Humanist Manifesto says. And I want to focus, and you should go and read this entire document, but I've been focusing on the first three articles in this manifesto. The first one being religious humanists regard the universe as self-existing and not creating and not created. So there is no creator, there is no God. Humanism believes that man is a part of nature, and that he has emerged as a result of a continuous process, this Darwinian evolution, and then holding the organic view of life. And it says life there. In holding the organic view of life, humanist finds that the traditional dualism of mind and body must be rejected, that there is no mind and body. The mind is just a physical part of the body, that the mind is not separate from the body, not something unique from the body, that if you have mental illness, then it's a part of your physical makeup. It's something that we can control with medications, because it's part of that's basically what they're saying here, is that the mind is basically physical, is what they're saying. So they create the material universe, create and tell you that it's only material, and you live in a material universe. We're looking at what Larry Summers here, who was Bill Clinton's Treasury Secretary, and the statements that he made on Meet the Press, and that's why we're getting into this, because he said that, or not Meet the Press, This Week on ABC, and he was saying that Donald Trump's trade policies and trying to use tariffs to rein in China is akin to what creationism is to biology. And I was explaining to you how that we don't know what life is, that life this statement that they say in the third article of the Humanist Manifesto, and holding the organic view of life, that we believe in the organic view of life. I was explaining how in the last podcast that this was before we knew about DNA. We hadn't mapped the genome yet. We didn't know anything about the inner workings of a cell. And this is with that knowledge, looking back on this statement about life is, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. But the statement that Larry Summers makes about biology being something that is so foreign from creationism, and that creationism can't have anything to do with biology. I was explaining in the last podcast how ridiculous that is. But there was a purpose that they wanted to create the material universe. Several purposes. One of them is so they can get you operating on a lower frequency and get you susceptible to all of the propaganda and marketing ploys that they wanted to use to sell you products, to sell you political ideas, to sell you political candidates, to sell you brands and entertainers and all of the things that they have sold you in your materialistic consumerist society that they created. They had to make you think that this is a material universe and it is only a material universe. There's nothing beyond the material universe. They had to make you think that way to get you to operate on a lower frequency so they can sell you the things that they wanted to sell you and the ideas that they wanted to sell you. Because these people, the elite, are doing spiritual warfare with you. They know that it's not a material universe. I'm going to show you here in a moment how they know that it's not a material universe. And they're operating in a spiritual realm, very dark. It's very dark spiritual realm that they're operating in against you. And they want to exert power over you. So they're using very dark spiritual forces to keep you in bondage. And they tell you that there is no spirituality. So you don't start identifying with a spiritual force that allows you to combat what they're doing to you on a spiritual level, if that makes sense. So they have to tell you that it's a material world. Like Madonna says, it's a material world and I'm a material girl. They have to ingrain that into your head, into the society, so you're vulnerable to their spiritual attacks. You don't understand what I'm saying, but you will. You will understand. So we were talking in the last podcast about the Cicero quote about the traitor, and how Cicero says that the traitor appeals to the baseness that lies deep in the hearts of all men, the baseness. And I was explaining to you how that relates back to Freudian psychology and how Freud theorized that at the subconscious level, at the base level, that there were subconscious feelings that people kept, what they called repressed. These were feelings that were repressed, and they were in the subconscious, and they were there dormant. And these were the things that the elite, after getting you to believe that this is a material world, and the only thing that we are physical beings in a material world. The people that wanted to instill that in you, they wanted to play on these base emotions, these base instincts, to get you to bring them out of a repressed state in the subconscious, to bring them forward. So you would act on these base emotional, these base instincts, these negative and often negative, everything here that is associated with the subconscious. And Freudian psychology says fear. It says violent motives, immoral urges, self needs, irrational wishes, shameful experiences, unacceptable sexual desires, your kinks, Your kinks are at the subconscious level, and these people sought to play on your subconscious sexual perversions and get you to bring those out. That's why you have the society that you're living in right now. And I was explaining to you how the same thing that Cicero says here in this quote, that he says this before the crucifixion of Jesus, before Paul writes any epistles, before Peter writes any epistles, before the Gospels are written. He says that the traitor appeals to the baseness that lies deep in the hearts of men. And that's it. What Sigmund Freud, psychology, and what Edward Bernays, Sigmund Freud's nephew who created propaganda, it's all in the century of the self again. That's what they sought to play on, is these base instincts, these base emotions. And I was explaining to you how the Bible talks about the same thing. The Bible calls those base subconscious instincts, those negative instincts, the fruits of the flesh. And the fruits of the flesh are antithetical. They're adverse to the fruits of the spirit. And what they've done in creating a material world, a material universe, and telling you that everything in your world is material, is they've excluded the fruits of the spirit, is what the Bible says. So you only have the fruits of the flesh. You only have these subconscious desires, emotions, and these things that are going to bring out negative fruits, negative fruits. And Paul writes about this in Galatians, the 5th chapter. And this is what he says. Now, I want you to see how similar the fruits of the flesh are to these emotional and instinctive things that are written here at the subconscious level in Freudian psychology. The id. This is the id down here. Fruits of the flesh. The acts of the flesh are obvious sexual immorality, impurity, debauchery, idolatry, and witchcraft, hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambitions, factions, and what is that? That's dissidence, envy, drunkenness, orgies. These are all associated with the fruits of the flesh, that the subconscious desires that the elite, that they sought out to play on using Freudian psychology. They sought to play on these subconscious instincts, emotional instincts, and bring them to the forefront and use the narrative that we're a material universe, that life developed organically, that man developed organically, that the universe developed organically. There is no God, there is no spirit. So they decided to play on these emotions. But look at the fruits of the spirit here. But the fruits of the spirit are love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. A fruit of the spirit is self-control, is what you're telling me? So how am I going to play on people's subconscious, emotional instincts and desires if they believe in a worldview that teaches them self-control? That's why you have so many people in our society today that have no self-control. Self-control is a fruit of the spirit. Against such things, there is no law. So what they've done is they've separated and they've done this through the school system, through public education, telling you that it's science and that, science and spirituality are antithetical, to each other. So they've separated you from, your spiritual existence, told you that you're a physical being in a material, world. And, the only thing that will satisfy you, your only purpose in life, is to acquire material possessions and pleasure. That's what they've told you. And now you have an epidemic of mental illness. Oh, you got an epidemic of mental illness? Let's go back to this third article here. In holding the organic view of life, humanists find that the traditional dualism of mind and body must be rejected. And now you have an epidemic of mental illness. Where did that come from? Because the same people that told you that this is a material world and indoctrinated you with materialistic, humanistic worldview, now they want to sell you drugs to manage the disconnect that you have because you shut yourself off from a spiritual reality and your soul and your spirit. You've shut yourself off from that. So now you only identify with the material world and pleasure and material possessions. And that's not fulfilling. And there's something missing. And now it's created this mental illness, this epidemic of mental illness, and to replace that something that's missing because of this disconnect that is going on, to replace that something that is missing, which is spirituality and the truth about the real makeup of our world and the real makeup of human existence, that we're not only physical beings, that we're spiritual beings as well, and that the four dimensions of this world are not all that there is, that there's more worlds, more reality out there than the material world. Because they've shut you off from that, there's a disconnect that's causing the mental illness. And to replace that disconnect, then they're bringing in the drugs, the pharmakia. This is a documentary that was done by the Scientologists. Full disclosure, the Scientologists made this documentary, and I don't agree with the Scientology and their theology, but in this, they got it right. Tom Cruise, there's a video of him speaking out about this and the use of pharmaceutical psychological drugs and the problem with it. Now, the Scientologists, they have a different theology about Xenu and thetans and all of that. But on this, they get it right about the overuse of pharmaceutical drugs and the full-on lobotomies that people are walking around in because they're disconnected from their spirituality, because they're disconnected from the spiritual world that transcends the four dimensions of space-time that we live in. I want you to watch a little bit of this documentary.
Over 40 years ago, leading psychiatrists met in Puerto Rico to map out their vision of the future.
We see a developing potential for nearly a total control of human emotional status, mental functioning, and will to act.
Their plan? To create by the year 2000 a range of psychiatric drugs regulating every aspect of human behavior.
Yeah, I was diagnosed with depression and put on Paxil.
ADD, and I was prescribed Ritalin.
General anxiety disorder, prescribed Zoloft.
Bipolar disorder, and I take lithium.
PTSD, Zoloft.
I was on Paxil.
When they placed me on Zoloft.
They gave me Adderall.
I was prescribed Sibtamu,
Tegretol,
Lexapro, Depakote,
Stelazine,
Adderall,
Concerta, Thorazine,
Prozac,
Lorazepam,
Effexor,
Clonazepam,
Ritalin,
Dexamphetamine,
Paxil,
Cylert,
Prozac,
Adderall,
Elavil,
Depakote, Wellbutrin, Seroquel, etc., etc.
100 million people worldwide are on psychiatric drugs. How did this happen? Psychiatrists convinced them they were sick.
They want you to think you're diseased from birth, and that all those experiences of life, childhood and adolescence and teenage years and adulthood and being a senior citizen, that these are all various stages of disease.
Because let's face it, we've all been depressed at one time. We've all been anxious at one time. These are normal emotions that we feel.
Every emotional and spiritual problem is reduced to a label.
And of course, all of those diseases require pharmaceutical treatments. This is big, big business.
So it's big business, big business. So they are not only making tons of money by using the idea that this is a material universe to sell you products, but they're also using it to sell you drugs. And pharmaceutical drugs psychological psych drugs, all the drugs that they just mentioned in the beginning of that documentary and more, are they're the most prescribed drug, or the second most prescribed drug in the United States of America. Painkillers, number one, and then psychiatric drugs. And when you think about that, when you look at that statistic, you know, most people who take painkillers, they take painkillers while they're in pain. When the pain goes away, then they get rid of the painkillers. These people who are on these psychiatric drugs, they can't get off of them. They have to keep eating them for the rest of their lives. And these people have been deceived into thinking that it's a material world. And that's why, and this as well, holding the organic view of life, like I was just explaining to you, humanists find that the traditional dualism of mind and body must be rejected. If you believe that, then you believe that a pill can cure your chemical imbalance, is what they told you. And it's been proven. I don't have the clip. I wish I would have prepped it, but I got so much to share with you. I don't even have time to go into that. But they did a study in England, and they proved that there is no such thing as a chemical imbalance. That whole chemical imbalance lie that they've been telling people over and over again for years, they've proved that there is no such thing as a chemical imbalance. There's just something else going on here, that we have this epidemic of mental illness. Now, the people who have told you that this is a material world, and they have indoctrinated an entire society that this is a material world, they know that it's not a material world. Many of them know that it's not a material world, and it's not a material world. There's more, just like I was showing you in the last podcast with DNA and microbiology, and showing that it's highly more probable that there is a God, there is a creator that created the coding, the DNA coding that is the basis for life as we know it on Earth, that the probability that was created by a creator is more likely than the DNA genetic code just developed organically. But similarly, the belief that we live in a material world and our entire existence is just the four dimensions of space-time, and that's it. Modern physicists know that that's not true. They know that that's not true. And they're not teaching that at school. Just like they're not teaching that DNA is genetic code and most likely came from a creator. Someone created that code. They're not teaching kids this physics, that the universe is more than just the four dimensions of space-time and the material universe. If you've never heard of the double slit experiment, this is an experiment that's been done many times. It was first done in the early part of the 19th century, and they are shooting photons through a double slit at a screen behind the double slit. If you've never heard of this experiment, take a listen to this clip.
The double slit experiment defies our understanding. It involves a laser shooting beams of light particles called photons at a screen with two parallel slits. If we mark all the spots where the photons hit the second wall, we should expect to see two strips to correspond with the two slits. But that's not what we see. Instead, we see an alternating pattern of light and dark bands. This is characteristic of the behavior of waves that pass through both slits simultaneously, interfering with each other to create the pattern on the second screen. The bright lines are where the top of waves meet, resulting in a more intense or brighter area on the screen. The darker bands are where the top of one wave meets the bottom of another, so they cancel each other out, resulting in a less intense or darker area on the screen. Here is a photo of a real interference pattern. The original double slit experiment was conducted in 1801 by British polymath Thomas Young. Since then, it's been performed with various types of particles, including electrons, and they were found to behave in the same way. This phenomenon occurs even if the photons are fired one at a time, which suggests that the photon is interfering with itself as it passes through both slits at once. Physicists were so stumped that they decided to observe which slit the particle went through. And that's when things get really weird. When scientists used a measuring device to observe the slit that each photon passed through, the interference pattern disappeared, and the photons started behaving like particles. Instead of the spectrum of light and dark bands, we see two bright bands, indicating that the photons chose one slit or the other. So light can display characteristics of both particles and waves, known as wave-particle duality. It appears that light decides to behave as a wave when it's not being watched, and acts like a particle when it is being measured. The mere act of observing which slit it went through changed the behavior of the photons, almost as if they were aware they were being watched. It's kind of like how in a video game, the environment and objects only load when the player focuses on or interacts with them. The entire world isn't rendered all at once, allowing the game to save processing power and optimize resources. Likewise, light seems to behave like waves, but when we observe it, it's as if we're loading its properties, causing it to change. And
she keeps saying light because in the initial experiment, photons were used. But like she says, that this experiment has been repeated many times with many other particles that are not photons. It's also been done with electrons, and they all have a wave function. Everything in our universe is made up of these atoms and these particles, and they have a wave function. That is not a material universe, people. That's not, this is evidence that there's more than just the four dimensions of space-time.
Like particles. Physicist Richard Feynman famously said, "The double-slit experiment is absolutely impossible to explain in any classical way, and has in it the heart of quantum mechanics. In reality, it contains the only mystery." The most widely accepted theory to explain this phenomenon comes from physicist Niels Bohr, who proposed that particles like photons don't have definite properties until they're observed. So in the case of light, photons exist in a wave-like form representing a range of possible positions until they are observed. When we measure or observe the particle, we force it to choose a definite state, behaving like particles. This is called the Copenhagen interpretation.
Copenhagen interpretation, remember that.
Named in honor of Bohr's home city. However, to this day, no one knows why observing a particle causes its behavior to change. Not everyone was a fan of his theory. Einstein disagreed that particles could be in multiple states at once until observed. He was uncomfortable with the inherent randomness of such an interpretation, and famously said, "God does not play dice with the universe." Einstein believed that the universe followed a consistent set of rules, like how his general relativity theory predicted the motion of planets around the sun. He spent his later years trying to develop a unified theory that explained everything in the universe, but he didn't succeed.
No one has succeeded at that, and that is the most elusive quest in all of science right now, is a unified theory, a theory that that explains the laws at the subatomic level and the laws at the atomic level, which the two laws do not agree. So the most elusive quest in physics right now is trying to develop a unified theory. And they thought that they had the theory with the Higgs boson, which they called the God particle. But it turned out that that wasn't the theory. That wasn't the theory at all. But one of my favorite physicists, Frank Tipler, who wrote this book called The Physics of Christianity. Let me read a little bit of what Frank Tipler says in this book here. He says, right here, top paragraph. Similarly, everyone who has an image of God, but to really understand God, to understand what God really is and how he could interact with the universe, one must use a theory beyond everyday common sense physics. He's talking about unified theory or theory of everything that Einstein was trying to come up with before he died. Never came up with it. No one's ever come up with a unified theory. Listen to what Frank Tipler says here. Contrary to what many physicists have claimed in popular press, we have had a theory of everything, unified theory, for about 30 years. Most physicists dislike this theory of everything because it requires the universe to begin in a singularity. That is, they dislike it because the theory is consistent only if God exists. And most contemporary scientists are atheists. They don't want God to exist. And if keeping God out of science requires rejecting physical laws, well, so be it, is what Frank Tipler says. And then he starts his book off. That's the preface right there. He starts his book off, a brief outline of modern physics. And he starts quoting all of these physicists, starting with Stephen Hawking. The many worlds interpretations is trivially true. Murray Gell-Mann, physics Nobel Prize laureate. The many worlds is okay. Steven Weinberg, physics Nobel laureate. The final approach to quantum mechanics is to take the Schrodinger equation and to give up the dualism of the Copenhagen interpretation, which we just saw in reference to Niels Bohr. The Copenhagen interpretation, and to try to explain its successful rules through a description of measure and their apparatus in terms of the same deterministic evolution of the wave function that governs everything. For what it's worth, I prefer the last approach, that he prefers the approach that the wave function governs everything. That's not a material universe. I question whether quantum mechanics, this is Anthony Leggett, physicist Nobel laureate. I question whether quantum mechanics is the complete and ultimate truth about the physical universe. In particular, I question whether the superposition principle can be extrapolated to the microscopic level in a way, in the way requires to a microscopic level in the way required to generate the quantum measurement paradox. I simply cannot convince myself that any of the solutions proffered to the quantum measurement paradox is, and this is Tipler, philosophically satisfactory. So he quotes all of these physicists. We'll read this last one right here. Or here, I want to read this one too, because so again, going back to what he says is that most scientists are atheists and they don't want to believe the science that's right there in front of their noses. So he says, this is a quote from this physicist Nobel laureate, Philip Anderson. I am afraid I do not, I am afraid I do. Why are you afraid? Why does it bring you fear to have to admit this? I am afraid I do believe in the many worlds interpretation. That means that there's worlds, dimensions outside of the four dimensions of space-time. That's what he's talking about here, the many worlds dimensions. He's talking about more dimensions in space-time. I am afraid I do believe in the many worlds interpretations. I agree with John Wheeler, who once said that that is too much, and then Tipler puts philosophical. There is too much philosophical baggage to carry around, but I can't see how to avoid carrying that baggage, that the many worlds interpretation is true, that this is not a physical universe or a material universe. It's not only a material universe. It's partly a material universe. It only turns into material when you're observing it. That's what this double slit experiment shows, that these particles, they only become particles when you're observing them. Other than that, they're wave functions. That's not material. I think we are forced to accept the many worlds interpretations of quantum mechanics is true. Richard P. Feynman, physics Nobel laureate. I do not see a way around the many worlds interpretations, but I wish someone would discover a way out. Physicist laureate. And then he quotes Jesus from John 18. My kingdom is not from this world. So Bill Maher did this new rules segment on Friday night, and it was just like a gut punch because he's making fun of Gen Z and making fun of our society. But what he's doing here as he's cracking jokes about the youngest generation that is entering adulthood right now, the young people here in our country that have been crippled with this debt that we have left them with. They can't afford homes. They can't afford families. They're not getting married. They are all on these pharmaceutical drugs and totally disconnected. And he does this segment, and it is a real, what he's saying, a lot of what he's saying is true, and it's not funny. He shouldn't be making a joke about it, but a lot of what he's saying is absolutely true. And it makes you think, are we already cooked? Are we already done? Is there any way to get out of this? But I want you to take a listen to what Bill Maher says here.
And finally, new rule now that the Trump administration has decided that America will pay any price and bear any burden to bring back factory jobs. They have to answer one question. Who's going to take them? Who exactly is supposed to do all this monotonous, low-paying labor? Immigrants? They're all deported. It'll probably be robots if we're not using them all for sex slaves. But I'll tell you who's definitely not doing it. Gen Z. The very people who would have to be most invested if this plan is going to work. Is this who we really think Gen Z is? A generation of...
Listen to how they're all laughing. Listen to all... I mean, this is a dire commentary on our society that this guy is talking about right here. That this new generation of young people in America, they not only cannot work the jobs in manufacturing, which I don't agree with that. I think that's he's just pushing Chinese propaganda, just like I was saying in the last podcast. A lot of people are pushing Chinese propaganda and saying, "Oh, you don't want these jobs." I do think that there are a lot of Americans who could do these jobs, but we have an epidemic of young Americans, a lot of them who honestly they couldn't do the jobs, and not only could they not do the jobs, you can't trust these young Americans that are coming up now to fight our wars, to do anything in the civil space. I mean, we're basically a dying country because we don't have a youth that is coming up that is responsible enough to do this stuff. Is what he's talking about here. They're not responsible. Why aren't they responsible? Because they're materialistic. They've been disconnected from their spirituality. They've been disconnected from their God. They've been disconnected and told that their entire existence is the purpose of their entire existence is pleasure and to acquire material possessions that don't fulfill them. And they are on all these pharmaceutical drugs. And yeah, we have a huge problem in this country.
Who make things with their hands, who get up early and go out to the plant in their hard hats with their lunch pails and come home dirty. Gruff men in newsboy caps working overtime at the
Yeah, he's just doing, this is all just Chinese propaganda here.
Seriously, these kids can't handle a gig at the Cheesecake Factory.
He's absolutely correct. They are over emotional. They are completely. They don't have any confidence. They are too sensitive. Completely vacuous and empty. He's absolutely right in part of what he's saying, and in some aspects, I do believe that he's pushing the Chinese propaganda too. Is that Americans can't do these jobs. Americans don't want these jobs, which is, I don't think that it's all true, but a lot of what he's saying, I do agree with.
They're quiet quitting office jobs. If you walk into a department store and ask them for something, they act like you barged into their apartment and woke them up. I'm sorry, but Generation Nepo Baby aren't exactly the sinewy, leather-skinned workmen of yesteryear. They're doughy gamers who need an emotional support animal to ride in a plane.
I'd say, I don't want to play all of this. You can go back and watch it if you haven't watched it, but he goes into how they're all on drugs, on the pharmaceutical drugs, and how they're so sensitive and overly emotional, and they're basically, useless, completely useless is what Bill Maher is saying about the Generation Z and the youth of our country. This is his commentary. And in some aspects, he's correct. In some aspects, he is pushing Chinese propaganda because, like I explained in the last podcast, this is a poll that Frank Luntz was highlighting just a week ago, where it showed that 80% of Americans, according to this poll, believe that America would be better with more manufacturing jobs. Right here. America would be better off if more people worked manufacturing. 80% of Americans agree. I would be better off if I worked in a factory. 25% of Americans agree, according to this poll. That's 1 in 4. 2% already working in factories. So it's just a lie to say that Americans won't do these jobs and Americans can't do these jobs. Some Americans would do these jobs and would be happy to do these jobs, especially if they paid a good wage and they were able to buy a house and raise a family. The reason you have such a big problem with people wanting to have kids and wanting to raise families is no one can afford it. No one can afford to have a family today because of the economic situations that they have left us and that they have put us in. $37 trillion in debt. And it's so crazy that Bill Maher's sitting here making fun of this generation that we have crippled with this debt when just 25 years ago, we were $30 trillion less in debt. 25 years ago, the national debt was about $5 or $6 trillion. Now it's $37 trillion that we've, in the past 25 years, that we've crippled these people, these kids with. And you want to sit around and make fun of them? A lot of them are depressed. A lot of them don't have any hope. A lot of them don't know what they're going to do with their lives and don't have any purpose. This was intentional. They created it. So going back to Larry Summers, we were talking about in the last podcast, and going to finish up talking about this clown who said that that Donald Trump's trade policy and trying to rectify these problems that they created in the Clinton administration, that it's akin to creationism and biology is what this clown says. And he was there at the ground level creating all of these problems that we are facing right now in the Clinton administration. In the Clinton administration, Larry Summers worked as the undersecretary of this guy, Robert Rubin. Robert Rubin was the Treasury Secretary from Goldman Sachs that Bill Clinton brought on to run the Treasury Department, and his protege was Larry Summers. Alan Greenspan was the Fed chair. And I explained what these guys did and how they set up the 2008 crash and not allowing Brooks Lee Bourne to regulate the over-the-counter derivatives. They did all of the deregulating. They got rid of Glass-Steagall. This guy gets rid of Glass-Steagall for Citigroup, and then he goes to work for Citigroup when he leaves the Treasury Department and resigns in 1999 after he had done all of his damage. And then when he resigns, his boy Larry Summers becomes the Treasury Secretary for that last year in the last few months of 1999, and then in 2000. Alan Greenspan was the Fed chair again, and these guys did major damage. We were talking about how everyone wants to talk to Larry Summers now in regards to Trump's trade policy and using these tariffs. He was on the Fareed Zakaria show last week. He's been on tons of podcasts. Again, he was on This Week with Stephanopoulos, who was another Clinton a guy who was in the Clinton administration just a few weeks ago. He's been all over. Everybody wants to talk to this clown, Larry Summers, and think that he's someone that we should be listening to when he was there creating all of these problems. But he was on a podcast last week. It's a great podcast. I don't have time to play all of it. Of course, I'm not going to play all of it. It's a 2-hour podcast. I definitely recommend going and watching all of it. But it's called the All In Podcast, and it's got David Sachs. David Sachs is part of the Trump administration. He's on here defending Trump's policies, and it's got Larry Summers on here, Ezra Klein, and then I forget the other guy's name. But I want you to take a listen. This is an interaction between Larry Summers and David Sachs. I want you to take a listen.
I don't think the millions of Americans who lost their jobs in the heartland because we let China into the WTO, which is something that Larry, I think, supported and championed.
We're talking about decades ago, though, right?
Yeah. That's what started this whole thing.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think those millions of people want to lose their jobs. So,
you're talking nonsense.
What are you talking about, Larry?
Respectfully, David.
You were Treasury Secretary when we walked China into the WTO, and you were just still defending it. I was just watching an interview. Hold on, Larry. Larry, you just did an interview with Neil Ferguson.
May I ask my question?
Why am I the only one who gets to talk for 2 seconds before I get interrupted?
Okay,
you guys
get on him, David.
Finish your thoughts. Finish your thoughts for 2-3 minutes, and then
I get to
Larry will
speak
go.
for 2 seconds. Then you interrupt me. You speak for 5 or 10 minutes.
Go right ahead,
Larry. I just saw you do an interview with Neil Ferguson where he asked you, was it a good idea to bring China into the WTO? Was it a good idea to give them permanent normal trade relations status, basically MFN, which is something that Bill Clinton did in 2000, and I admit it was bipartisan. George W. Bush continued it.
MFN stands for most favored nation, okay? Most favored nation.
Normal trade relations status, basically MFN, which is something that Bill Clinton did in 2000, and I admit it was bipartisan. George W. Bush continued it. And you were defending this as
Those are brothers.
A good idea
They're brothers.
For the country. What was the result of that over the past 25 years? Millions of industrial jobs were lost. They were exported to China. Millions of factories shut down. The United States has a diminished and hollowed out industrial base. We certainly can't make the products of the future like drones or semiconductors. Jason, just to answer your question, yeah, obviously some industries are more strategic than others. Do I personally care about sneakers or textiles? No, I personally don't. Do I care about semiconductors? Absolutely. Do I care about circuit boards? Do I care about drones? Do I care about robots? Do I care about EVs and cars? Absolutely.
Okay.
Those
David,
industries, we are no longer in a position. David, we are no longer in a position as a country to make those products because we exported our entire supply chain and manufacturing base to China.
David, I have 3
questions. How is that a good idea, Larry?
Okay,
David,
Larry,
I have
you
3
go,
questions
and then
for you.
Ezra, I'll go back to you and Shimon. Go ahead,
I have
Larry.
3 questions for you. 1, can you name a single trade barrier that was reduced by the United States associated with China accession? A single restriction that existed in the United States that had not been in place for 5 years before that we removed during China's WTO accession. Can you?
All right. So the question that Larry Summers is asking David Sachs is to name something. He says that we started this trade policy, this most favored nation policy during the Reagan administration, is what Larry Summers is essentially saying. That China had trade relations with us before we accepted them in the World Trade Organization. So he's asking David Sachs, name one thing that changed in our trade relations with China that came after we accepted them and gave them permanent, keyword permanent, trade status and brought them into the World Trade Organization. Can you name anything that changed in our trade relations after that than before that, is what Larry Summers is asking.
You name one?
I don't think we should have done any of it, Larry. We threw open our markets to Chinese goods.
What restriction? Your thesis is that we threw open the market and therefore we exposed ourselves to all of this China thing.
The
question I'm asking you is, can you name any restriction on Chinese exports to the United States that was in effect in 1999 and was removed by our WTO accession in 2000? Can you name any such restriction. Just name
Larry,
one
this
for
was
me.
a policy that built up over time and was basically made permanent. Hold on. It was made permanent when we walked China to the WTO.
Keyword permanent.
And gave them MFN status.
I'm sorry, David. I'll ask the question one more time. We had given them MFN status 15 years before. They had MFN status. They had it for 15 years. There was not a single reduction in a barrier to Chinese trade. So the way in which you're describing it is just bears no resemblance to what it was.
Why was it necessary to bring them into the WTO? What was the point of bringing them into the WTO?
The point of bringing them into the WTO was to use the leverage that we had to win a whole variety of concessions that enabled us to
Larry, let's be honest.
More to China.
So listen. So he's saying nothing changed. That we have been giving China most favored nation status going back to the Reagan administration. Well, what changed is what Larry Summers is saying. So he's defending the policy of these guys and what these guys did. What these guys did to us. He's defending it is what Larry Summers is doing here. And Sachs is saying, look, how can you defend this when we know we're 20 years, 25 years down the road? We know how damaging this was, and you're still defending it? And Larry Summers is sitting here saying, well, what was the restriction that China had that after we accepted them into the WTO before that they didn't have before is what he's calling on. And then then David Sachs says, then why did we? What was the whole purpose of accepting them into the WTO in the first place? Why did we give them permanent status in the first place if nothing changed? What was the whole purpose of that? And he says, and Larry Summers says, well, we were able to ship our products into China after that. And then watch how that goes.
That we had to win a whole variety of concessions that enabled us to
Larry, let's be honest.
More to China.
This is an extraordinary rewriting of history,
reciprocity.
Larry. This is an extraordinary rewriting of
Larry Summers is a clown.
Larry,
let's move forward.
I want to respond to this.
History. You're denying
totally
history.
denying history. All right, listen.
This is a bad deal.
Hold on a second. Let's go back to this.
Just a minute. I just want to know that the whole argument you are making is about increased exports to the United States that had bad consequences.
Yeah, we have a bad trade deficit, huge trade deficit.
What barrier that previously existed?
Okay, I'll name
removed.
them. I'll name.
All right, so this is more of the interaction. I just want to move ahead here. Take a listen.
Okay,
you can have the last word.
So March 9, 2000, Bill Clinton announces PNTR at Johns Hopkins.
PNTR stands for Permanent Normal Trade Relations, and what you see here is let's read this first paragraph. The status of permanent normal trade relations is the legal designation in the United States for free trade with a foreign state. The designation was changed from most favored nation status. So, in tax on this section of the Internal Revenue Act 5003 is what this is related to. So, most favored nation is PNTR. PNTR, most favored nation, is the same thing. They just changed the name, and this means permanent is what this stands for. I'm going to explain a little bit more of this to you here in a moment, but I want you to listen to more of David Sachs.
So March 9, 2000, Bill Clinton announces PNTR at Johns Hopkins. It's a very famous speech. Larry, maybe you can tell us about how it got written. Anyway, Bill Clinton promises several things. He makes a number of arguments for PNTR. He does not think that this does nothing. Larry, your argument is that Bill Clinton didn't do anything.
Listen to what he's saying. Listen, so David Sachs is Larry Summers is saying that us accepting China into the WTO in 2000 and giving them permanent trade status, that did nothing. That didn't change anything then from what was going on, going back to the 1980s and the Reagan administration. And what Sachs is doing, he's referencing a speech that Bill Clinton gave in 1989 when he announced PNTR. And he's saying that Bill Clinton is saying that these are the changes that will come about when we accept China into the WTO, that this is what we're going to get for accepting China in the WTO, that these are the changes.
He does not think that this does nothing, Larry. Your argument is that Bill Clinton didn't do anything. You're saying that somehow it happened under Reagan or something like that. That's not what Bill Clinton was arguing. He said, number one, there'd be huge economic benefits for the U.S. He says, quote, by this agreement, we will increase exports of American products. He means to China. That will create American jobs. Okay. Did that happen the way we intended?
No.
I don't think so. Number two is he believed that.
Have you looked at the data on export flows?
Huge deficits, bro.
It actually did happen.
Huge
at a quite
deficits.
Substantial rate.
But with huge trade deficits for the United States.
Huge deficits.
You're arguing that they did not act in a discriminatory way towards our products.
You didn't have anything
this
to
idea
say.
That Americans could just do business in China the way that they could do business here is ridiculous. Anyone who tried to do business over there knows you have to create a JV. You have to get a local partner.
Absolutely.
51%.
That's what Kevin O'Leary was saying. Kevin O'Leary was saying that as well. Every business person knows this, that's what you're saying, Larry Summers, is completely false.
Products. This idea that Americans could just do business in China the way that they could do business here is ridiculous. Anyone who tried to do business over there knows you have to create a JV. You have to get a local partner, give them 51%. It was extraordinarily difficult. We were discriminated against, Larry.
Okay.
It's ridiculous to try and claim that somehow this was an equal relationship, okay? And we imported far more from them than we ever exported to them. So Bill Clinton was wrong about that. Number two, he said that signing PNTR and bringing China to the WTO would promote democracy in China, that we would export one of democracy's most cherished values, economic freedom. Did that happen? I don't think so. He said this would strengthen global trade by ensuring China adhere to international trade rules, reducing trade barriers, and resolving disputes through WTO. Did that happen? I don't think so. And then he said on national security, he said it would improve our national security to bring China to WTO and help make them rich. He said, quote, if we don't deal with China in this way, we will increase the prospect that they will turn inward. That's not what happened. We helped make China rich. We've exported millions of jobs to them. They built up their economy and their supply chain to the point where now they are a global competitor to the United States. They're a pure competitor. We turned that baby dragon into a Drogon-sized monster that can now challenge us in Asia and across the world.
Across the world. It was so dangerous what you guys did. It's so dangerous what you guys did to us, Larry Summers, and facilitating the rise of this atheistic, communist, totalitarian, authoritative power. You facilitated that and allowed that to happen, Larry Summers. You and the Clinton and Gore and Greenspan and Rubin. You guys did that to us. And Sachs is absolutely right in what he's saying.
Number two, he said that, did that happen? I don't think so. He said this would strengthen global trade by ensuring WTO. Did that happen? I don't think so. And then he said on national security, he said it would improve our national security to bring China to WTO and help make them rich. He said, quote, if we don't deal with China in this way, we will increase the prospect that they will turn inward. That's not what happened. We helped make China rich. We've exported millions of jobs to them. They built up their economy and their supply chain to the point where now they are a global competitor to the United States.
Absolutely.
They're a pure competitor. We turned that baby dragon into a Drogon-sized monster that can now challenge us in Asia and across the world for.
Look at this guy's face. He's just such a clown. I swear. And what Sachs is saying is absolutely right. You can see the charts. You can see that as China's middle class starts to grow, the middle class in the United States starts to decline. Like you can see the middle class in the United States decline as the middle class in China growing. The only difference is, we're going to get into this in the next podcast, is that their middle class is under a communist, totalitarian, authoritative, atheistic state. And that's different. I'm going to explain to you, the objective, because there is an objective here in decreasing our middle class and getting rid of our middle class and the growth of their middle class in China. Let's look at this PNTR though. Permanent, keyword permanent, normal trade relations. And then China gets PNTR, or most favored nation, in 1998 or 99. But where does it say that? There's something that I wanted to show you where it says that it was annual, that they had to come back annually and get this designation, that they didn't just get it one time. They had to come back. And here it is right here. For many years, the People's Republic of China was the most important country in this group, which required an annual waiver to maintain free trade status. So what Larry Summers is saying here is right. He's saying that most favored nation status, this trade status goes back to the Reagan administration. But from the Reagan administration until what you guys did in 1999, 2000 in the Clinton administration, from the Reagan administration to that point where you made the change in 1998 exactly, they had to come back every year for reauthorization of this trade agreement. And when Larry Summers is saying what changed after we gave them the most favored nation status and induction into the world trade, what changed is that they didn't have to come back every year anymore, that it was permanent, from that point. Larry Summers, that's what you guys did. And this is Nancy Pelosi. I explained this in the last podcast, and that it's bizarre that her nephew now in California, governor of California, is suing the president of the United States over this policy, because back in 1996, she was on the House floor speaking out against giving China most favored nation status. And against normalizing trade relations with them when they had to come back every year and get this authorization. Nancy Pelosi's on the floor saying we shouldn't give it to them this year. We shouldn't give it to them.
How far does China have to go? How much more repression? How big a trade deficit and loss of jobs for the American worker? And how much more dangerous proliferation has to exist before members of this House of Representatives will say, I will not endorse the status quo? As I mentioned, it's about jobs, proliferation, and human rights. And there are those who say we shouldn't link human rights and trade and proliferation and trade. I disagree. But if we just want to take up this issue on the basis of economics alone, indeed, China should not receive most favored nation status.
So she was saying that back in 1996. Bill Clinton and Larry Summers, they give China this permanent status in 1998, 2 years after she's saying this. But that was the change, Larry Summers, the fact that you gave them permanent status and they didn't have to come back every year for an annual waiver.
One more time, because you are just not speaking truth.
How am I not speaking
want to
truth?
know one restriction that the United States had on Chinese products that was changed in the year 2000. You've said 7 times, throw open our market to Chinese products. I want to know one example in which the United States opened its market in 1999 or 2000.
The point of PNTR. Well,
can you name one product where restrictions were reduced?
Okay, David, name it.
Listen, you're mischaracterizing what PNTR did. We can play this like a Grok game if you want. People can go ahead and grok this question and they'll get this answer. Look, the answer is that before PNTR, China was granted MFN on a year-by-year basis by Congress. Correct?
Absolutely.
PNTR made it permanent.
Absolutely.
What does that do? It created a permanent new framework for trade relations between the United States and China.
Look at his face. Look at Larry Summers' face. He starts shaking his head.
A certain expectation. What did that enable? Massive investment by U.S. companies in China. So all the bean counters from McKinsey started talking about outsourcing and just-in-time manufacturing. They started moving the factories over there in a much greiter way. You know, the Mitt Romneys and private equity. Hold on a second. Let me finish.
Can we disagree
the Mitt
on the
Romney.
And if you watch this whole podcast, this clown, Ezra Klein, he keeps trying to run cover for Larry Summers. So David Sachs has basically, destroyed Larry Summers in this debate. And then Ezra Klein's coming in and trying to defend him. But David Sachs is absolutely right. They made it permanent. And when they made it permanent, because it was permanent, they weren't having to come back every year, then that allowed these corporations from the United States to develop a permanent relationship in China, because the trade relation was permanent at that point. That's just one example of what you guys did. I don't have a lot of time. I want you to listen to a little bit of Chris Cuomo on his show last week, and he goes into a little bit about, he doesn't talk specifically about the debate on that podcast, but the issues that they're talking about, Chris Cuomo covers here. Take a listen.
Those guys on stage with Trump, the big dollar donors for the Democrats in Silicon Valley and other major industries, they all went to China for what? Cheap labor, no environmental concerns, no labor safety standards. Most of them come from where? The middle class. And then they not only turned their back on it, but they totally screwed it over. And this is not some hot take. It is data. In 1970, the middle class in this country earned 60% of the income. The rich, 30%. China was the 8th largest economy. America was first. Then came the big bad year, 2001. What does this have to do with 9/11? I'm not talking about 9/11. 9/11 was a major catastrophe. Something else happened in 2001. You know what it was? China getting into the WTO, the World Trade Organization. 4 years later, China, 4th biggest economy.
You understand what he's saying? He's saying that that China was the 8th largest economy, even with all the trade that had been going back and had been done going back to the Reagan administration. After China gets permanent acceptance in the WTO, 4 years later, they go from the 8th largest economy in the world to the 4th largest economy in the world, is what Chris Cuomo correctly says here.
China getting into the WTO, the World Trade Organization. 4 years later, China, 4th biggest economy. Why? Millions of jobs from here sent there. Hey, but that's globalization. We got cheap stuff in return. Okay, but now don't we see that the cost of that cheap stuff
Larry Summers
was
doesn't see it.
What really had value?
Larry Summers doesn't see
jobs for millions of middle-class folk. We traded cheap sneakers for the ability to afford a home.
Wow.
To pay.
Wow. He says that we traded cheap sneakers for the ability to afford a home. And Chris Cuomo is absolutely right. We traded cheap Chinese plastic products, the products that Gavin Newsom was saying that his kids have underneath their Christmas tree. We traded the cheap stuff for the ability to buy a home, to be able to have a family, to be able to have a stable job. We traded that for those cheap Chinese goods. I wish I had more time to play more of that, because he explains how in the United States, the people who benefited were the people on the top, these corporate people that were making money off of cheap labor in China. I'll get back into this in the next podcast. I still got a lot to share. Hope you guys have a great week, and I'll see you on Friday.